So without further ado, I welcome Sienna Taylor to speak on her presentation called Leveraging Newcomer Talent from Resumes to Retention.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. Just want to confirm everyone's able to see my screen and the PowerPoint. Okay, fantastic. So hello, like Patricia said, my name is Sienna Jae Taylor, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. Before we jump into the good stuff, I do want to share a little bit about where I am coming from today. I'm here today representing a number of organizations. First and foremost, WIL Employment Connections. WIL is a nonprofit organization dedicated primarily to facilitating the economic and social integration of newcomers to Canada, or in other words, we offer a number of programs and services that support immigrants from pre-employment prep all the way to mentorship opportunities and job placement. I'm also here representing two partner projects of WIL, and these are two organizations that you are most definitely going to want to take note of. The first is Immploy, which Patricia mentioned. Immploy exists to connect employers to immigrant talent through three main programs: recruitment services, mentorship opportunities, and education and training. The second is the Access Center for Regulated Employment, which, as you can likely tell from the name, provides information and application assistance to internationally trained individuals seeking licensure. The Access Center can also be a really great resource for employers that are within regulated industries. But enough about me and mine. Today, we are here to talk about leveraging newcomer talent from resumes to retention. So during today's presentation, we'll explore ways that you can access and attract internationally trained individuals, better understand international resumes and credentials, and begin thinking ahead to some more inclusive onboarding strategies for greater retention of newcomer talent in your organizations or in your companies. So before we jump in, it's always important to get a good understanding of the current context of our country. So when it comes to immigrants and the labor market, what do we already know? So first, Canada's fertility rate is 1.5, well below the replacement rate of 2.1, which means that Canadian families are having less and less children. By 2030, Canada's 9.2 million baby boomers will all be of retirement age. And currently, immigration drives 82% of Canada's population growth, expected to be 100% in the coming years. Canada's worker to retiree ratio in 2036 will be 2:1. And if you see that little image up in the top right-hand corner, you can see the drastic difference from 1971 to what is expected in 2035. Basically, what this means is there aren't enough people of working age replacing those who are retiring. By 2040, 23% of Canada's population will be 65 or older. And by 2030, immigration could, keyword could, add 5 million workers to the labor force. So although there is a mass exodus of boomers from the workforce on the horizon, we know that immigration can offer a viable solution within the labor market if we are willing to tap into the immigrant talent that is here. So what does the current participation of immigrants look like across the country? So immigrants and temporary foreign workers, of course, fill gaps in Canada's labor force. So very interesting, the tail end of the last presentation talking about, those challenges that folks are having in recruiting and accessing talent. We know that immigrants and temporary foreign workers can fill those gaps. Approximately 1 in 4 workers, so that's 26% of workers in Canada, are immigrants. 600,000 self-employed immigrants are employing over 260,000 Canadians. And in a 2018 survey, 9% of business owners reported hiring temporary foreign workers to address their job vacancies. In 2019, the labor market participation rates of very recent immigrants was 71%, with recent immigrants being 76%. And in 2016, over 1/3 of nurse aides, orderlies, and patient service associates in Canada were immigrants. We also know that immigrant owners of small to medium-sized enterprises are very successful in introducing products, processes, or marketing innovations into the marketplace. So we can clearly see that the contribution of newcomers in the workforce. What's important to remember, though, is that of course the economy and the labor market has been hugely impacted by COVID-19. And more than that, immigrants are among the highest that have been negatively impacted, specifically women. So as we think about recovery, we need to consider these folks and their participation in the labor market. We also need to keep in mind that although 70% participation across the country looks good, these statistics vary in different regions. For example, in the London economic region, new research shows that immigrants have one of the highest rates of non-participation, despite wanting to work and having higher levels of education than Canadian-born folks. Something I always find interesting to understand is where newcomers are landing in their careers in Canada, because this gives us a good idea of the skills and talents that they're bringing to our communities. So what you see here on the screen are the percentage of business owners who are also immigrants to Canada. Immigrants account for 33% of all business owners with paid staff, creating important local jobs in all sectors of the economy. Now, I'm sure most of us tuning in today are looking to hire, and so you're not likely recruiting entrepreneurs, but consider that many of these entrepreneurs go this route because they aren't able to find employment elsewhere. Imagine if we were able to tap into that talent in our existing organizations and companies. When you look at immigrants in food and beverage, there's 53% of those in this industry are immigrants across Canada and 59% across Ontario. 1 in 4 people employed as an artisan or craftsperson in Canada is an immigrant, and over a quarter of theater, fashion, exhibit, and other creative designers are immigrants. You can see here that there is still a high percentage of immigrants represented in creative fields. Oftentimes there's this generalization that immigrants in our region are all doctors or engineers, and although there most definitely is a very high percentage of those, the skill set that these folks are bringing to our communities is actually very diverse. So regardless of the industry that you are in, consider the fact that immigrants have a lot to offer there. One of the big ones, of course, is STEM, so science, tech, engineering, and math. 34% of people working in scientific research and development services across the country are foreign-born. Nearly 500,000 immigrants working in Canada are trained in science, tech, engineering, and mathematics fields. 27% of all students enrolled in mathematics, computer, and information science programs are immigrants, and 19% of students in architecture, engineering, and other related programs, despite only representing 12% of the post-secondary education system. So one of the things that I always like to remind employers of is that we have so many individuals that are being trained here in Canada, and the majority of international students actually land right here in Ontario. We need to do what we can to recruit and retain these individuals once their education is complete. And the big one, immigrants in healthcare. More than 1.6 million people work in Canada's healthcare sector, which we know is not enough. However, 500,000 are over the age of 55 with retirement on the horizon within the next decade. So if you look here, you can see that 23% of registered nurses are immigrants, 35% of nurse aides, 37% of pharmacists, 36% of physicians, 39% of dentists, 54% of dental technologists. And these are just the individuals who were able to get licensure and get hired in their field. We rely on immigrants hugely in the healthcare sector. So let's take a second here and pause. I know that I've thrown a ton of information at you, from changes in population and the labor market to statistics in immigrant occupations. But if you take anything away from what I just shared, it should be this: Ontario needs workers, and bonus, we have a reputation of attracting very talented immigrants that contribute to our economy and our workforce in very real ways. But alas, nothing is ever quite as easy as it seems. And that brings us to the big conundrum. The majority of immigrants to Canada, as you've just seen, are highly educated and highly skilled individuals. And the majority of these folks are also working age. And bonus, 44% of immigrants in 2020 settled in Ontario. There are so many incredibly talented people coming to Ontario. However, as I mentioned earlier, our birth rate is declining while boomers are retiring, and we are experiencing a major labor shortage. And yet, employers in Southwestern Ontario are reporting challenges recruiting and retaining talent. In some regions, as I mentioned, immigrants make up the highest percentage of groups that are unemployed or underemployed. And despite having higher levels of education, immigrants have less access to employment opportunities, to adequate wages and pathways of progression in their workplaces. So the big question, have you and your company been intentional about accessing and attracting newcomer talent? When it comes to accessing newcomer talent, the most important thing I think to remember is that you need to meet newcomers where they are at. Gone are the days where you can bring in a wealth of talent through the post and pray approach. There are more jobs than there are people, so getting through the noise online and in this sector can be a challenge. But there are a number of organizations and resources that we know newcomers take advantage of. And it would benefit you not just to become aware of these resources, but also consider how you can build a relationship with these organizations so that you can better streamline opportunities direct from your workplace right to the newcomers that are looking for work. So of course, I'm going to pitch WIL Employment Connections again. There are a lot of organizations that serve newcomers, and there are a lot of organizations that support employment. But WIL is a one of a kind in our region in terms of tailoring our programs and services to meet the needs of newcomer job seekers and bridge that connection between newcomers and employers. So WIL Employment Connections exist to support all across Southwestern Ontario, including the partner projects I mentioned, Immploy and the Access Centre for Regulated Employment. Across Canada and in Ontario, we also have access to immigrant employment councils. A couple of examples include the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, Immploy, and Hire Immigrants Ottawa. These are really, really great resources where you can not only connect with newcomers, but you can also better learn how to engage, recruit, and retain them. It's also good to get connected with economic development centers or corporations. Any Employment Ontario agency, organizations like YMCAs or Goodwills that offer employment supports and programs to newcomers, and of course, local immigration partnerships. And you are already made familiar with the St. Thomas Elgin Local Immigration Partnership. We're very lucky in Ontario that there are a ton of LIPs, as we call them, in Sarnia-Lambton and Windsor-Essex and London-Middlesex and Huron County, Perth County, all over the place. So if you aren't already connected with them, make sure you get connected and you're paying attention to what they have to offer. And again, just that friendly reminder that you want to meet people where they are at. So this here is not by any means an exhaustive list, but it's just a way to get you started on understanding how and where you can connect with newcomers. But like anything in a highly competitive space, you need to not only know how to access the talent, but you need to be able to attract the talent. Attraction is where the real work comes in. So to set yourself apart from other employers across the region, you're going to want to adopt these 5 strategies that I have listed here. So get your pencils, your pens out, your notepad, your cell phone, whatever you use to take notes, because you're going to want to jot down some of this stuff here. So first off, inclusive job postings. So you want to ensure that the job postings you're creating are actually inclusive. This doesn't just mean having a statement at the bottom of the posting about being an equal opportunity employer. It means building those practices into the job posting itself. You want to make sure that the language on the posting is clear and concise and that you're using plain English. Avoid using slang, metaphors, or industry jargon. And remember that English may be a new or second language to newcomers, and we want to avoid language that requires a high level of cultural context. You also want to focus on the essentials. Don't inflate the education or experience that you are looking for. Focus on what you need for that job. Otherwise, you're going to see people screening themselves out of those positions. Be as specific as you can. Again, keep in mind that newcomers may not have cultural context yet. So you want to be as clear and as specific as you can in terms of who your company is, what the job is, and what kind of skills and qualifications you're looking for. Also, be accessible. We often treat the application and the interview process like this big secretive thing. But why do we do this? Ask for what you need, give details about the application and the interview process, and be available in case people have questions. Again, thinking about newcomers who may not have that experience or insight in common practices in Canada, what can you offer them to make it a little bit easier? Also, consider what equity and inclusion means for your company or your organization. Many companies will have statements or policies around equity, diversity, and inclusion, but how does your company actually live and breathe these policies? Incorporate this into the job posting so that equity-seeking groups like newcomers know that they are welcome and feel called upon to apply. Sometimes a simple statement like "newcomers encouraged to apply" can go a long way. And of course, you want to embrace change, but not at the risk of inclusion. So oftentimes we see these really sort of creative job titles and job postings coming out as a way to engage in and attract millennial generation. But we want to make sure that we're not excluding people while we're doing that. So again, remember, be clear, be specific. Second, proactive hiring. So proactive hiring and recruitment is a strategy that really focuses on sourcing, engaging, and attracting candidates ahead of the hiring demand. It's about developing a recruitment pipeline rather than the aforementioned post and pray approach when you need to hire immediately. Consider developing a career site or a page that includes equity, diversity, and inclusion. Make sure that it's mobile friendly, as we know that is often where most people are applying for jobs, but especially immigrants and newcomers. For many of them, their phone is their computer. So you want to make sure everything is mobile friendly, not just the posting, but also the application process. Find ways to build a talent pool. Could you have an email list? Could you have an e-newsletter where you can send content or at least keep engaged with people who are interested in what you do and accessing opportunities when they come available? Again, make sure the application process is simple and user-friendly. It is wild how often we see job postings where links aren't working, it's not clear how to apply, it's not clear who to connect with. So make sure that the process is very easy. And then of course, and one of the most important things you can do, take advantage of networking opportunities. For organizations that work with newcomer talent, we are constantly creating opportunities to bring folks together. Obviously now a lot of that's virtual, but when those opportunities arise, attend those sessions. Even if you're not hiring in the moment, you want to get the word out about your company, and you also want to see what kind of talent is out there in your community and how can you start to engage those folks ahead of time. Number 3, collaboration. Work with diverse groups of people, both within your organization or your company and out in the community. So think about panels, the planning of recruitment and outreach, and the actual outreach itself. You want to engage different kinds of people within your company and organization so that you're getting different experiences, different insight, and also connection to different communities and networks across your region. You also want to make sure that you're developing relationships with community-based organizations that are already connected to the communities that you want to reach. That's where LIPs can come in really, really handy. Number 4, reach out. This one is so obvious that it shouldn't need to be said, and yet we find ourselves reminding companies and organizations of this over and over and over again. If we don't reach out, we are only engaging those who are already plugged into our community and our company. If we don't reach beyond our personal or current networks, we're not tapping into the benefits that a diverse workforce brings. And if we really want to expand our talent pool and really create equal opportunity, we need to commit to active outreach and engagement. And finally, set targets. What this really means is that we need to develop equity, diversity, and inclusion policies in workplaces that are also reflected in our recruitment practices. And most importantly, we need to hold ourselves accountable. This is not about tokenism. It's about ensuring that we do what we say we are going to do. This is going to require an understanding of the demographics that actually exist in your communities and what you can do to ensure that your company reflects that community and is inclusive of that community. So imagine that you've taken these 5 strategies back to your team and you've got a stellar recruitment strategy in place. Now all the resumes are flowing in. The next big task is screening resumes. So if you put your notes away, your pencil, your pen, your computer, your phone, whatever, pull it back out because we've got another set of really great tips that I think will help you in screening resumes. This is often where we see some of the biggest challenges when it comes to unconscious bias, direct discrimination, and simply understanding credentials and experience. This is a key activity to address if you're really wanting to expand your talent pool and engage newcomers, because you don't want to be screening out really incredible talent because of biases that may exist. All right, so number 1, the diverse hiring committee. So just as we talked about with the recruitment process and creating job postings, you want to ensure that you have a diverse hiring committee. It's important in the recruitment stage, and you most definitely want to engage them in the screening phase, not just in the interview process. This helps to balance out any bias that might exist and ensures diversity of thought and experience as you screen. Second, focus on essentials. Again, same as the job postings, you don't want to inflate your needs. We need to get rid of this idea that we're looking for some perfect candidate and we're going to check off this lengthy list of skills and qualifications. We need to focus on the essentials required to do the job and to do it well. Focus on the need to have, not the nice to have. When you focus too much on the nice to have, you start screening so many incredible people out. We also want to make sure that we're not making assumptions about whether the candidate is going to be a good fit for our team. And we also want to make sure that we're not making assumptions about the wealth of the experience or education that they bring. Remember that we're all taught to cater our resumes to the roles that we're applying for. So there's likely a lot more that newcomer individuals may bring with them that aren't currently listed on their resume. Number three, we want to assess readability carefully. Consider that many newcomers likely speak multiple languages. And hello, this is an incredible skill set to bring into your company. But English may not be their first language. And so there may be written errors in resumes. However, this is not necessarily a reflection of people's ability to communicate verbally or at an acceptable level to do the job that you're hiring for. Allowing a little bit of understanding and flexibility in this regard can really help to widen your talent pool and engage newcomers. Number four, we want to allow for those cultural differences. What I mean when I say this is that we have become accustomed to a certain way that resumes should look. But if you consider the fact that 60, sometimes 90% in some areas of newcomers do not access any settlement services at all, some may not have been offered guidance or support on Canadian style resumes and expectations. Focus on the content of the resume, the skills that are being listed on the resume versus the design and the format. And remember, there is a huge difference between doing something poorly and doing something differently. Just because we're not familiar with the look of a particular resume doesn't mean that what's on it is not relevant. And of course, you want to assess experience with that diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. One of the most important questions that you can ask yourself and ask your hiring committee while screening resumes is, what are the assumptions I'm making? What are the assumptions we are making? For example, when we see gaps in positions on resumes, we sometimes make an assumption about the person's work ethic. However, it's important to remember that many newcomers may have time gaps on their resumes, which could be due to immigration itself or challenges in gaining employment in their field once they've arrived. So there are a number of reasons why we may see things that we're not used to on resumes. So diving a little bit deeper into assessing experience. First off, we want to make sure that we're focusing on transferable skills rather than job titles. Remember that newcomers are coming from different countries and different cultures where job titles might look different for different roles. So you really want to focus on those skill sets. You want to make sure that you're using a competency-based approach to evaluate fit for the role. So what we mean when we say competency-based is we don't want to look for, have they done this exact job before, but does the resume demonstrate competency in the skills that we're looking for? We also want to recognize the Canadian experience gap. Ask yourself, do we need Canadian experience? And if so, why? There are, of course, some industries and some professions that are regulated and do require that Canadian experience. But a lot of jobs do not require that Canadian experience. But for some reason, we feel the need to have that there. So ask yourself, do you really need that Canadian experience? And if you feel that you do, why is that? Is there something else that you're looking for? Something that maybe could be gained through volunteer experience or other community engagement? So just take some time to actually think about that. We also want to make sure that we're not underestimating international education or international experience either. We have this tendency to lean toward what we know. We have a bias around Canadian education and experience. And I hate to break it to you, although we have got great education here in Canada, we're not necessarily the best. Another thing to consider is whether your assumptions about education or experience is based on real knowledge or just comfort with being able to recognize it. So for example, I went to Western University. I have a good understanding of the level of education that they offer. but I don't know any more about UBC out west than I do about a university in Dubai. So we want to make sure that we acknowledge these biases as we're screening. And also, you want to make sure that you rely on and trust your committee. So we talked about creating that committee. Make sure that that's not a token committee. If you create that committee because they bring in diverse knowledge and experience and insight, make sure that you value and create space for different opinions and ideas and perspectives on the candidates that are applying within your organization or company. Also consider removing non-essential information. Biases are real. Is it possible to take some things off the resume through the screening process? For example, names, locations of jobs, locations of education. What is the most important thing for you to have? And could you remove some of that other stuff that could create some of those biases? If you use a matrix for screening resumes, make sure that you're using the same matrix across all resumes. Sometimes having a matrix or a checklist can help you to reduce that bias as you're screening resumes. And of course, if you are looking for credential evaluation or you're working within a regulated industry, make sure that you're taking advantage of organizations and services that are available to us. The World Education Services is a really great service for newcomers and employers if you're wanting to get that credential evaluation or equivalency done. So speaking of regulated fields, this next little piece, accreditation, validation, and regulation, oh my. So I am not going to read through this entire list, but as you can see, Ontario has a number of regulated fields. So for those that may not be coming from a regulated field, or for folks that work with newcomers and aren't quite sure what it is, a regulated profession is any profession or trade that requires a license or certificate and requires registration with a proper regulatory body. So for organizations that are hiring, or organizations or companies that are hiring in a regulated field, there may be an extra step or two to consider when you are recruiting and hiring newcomers. However, this isn't something that you have to navigate on your own as an employer. And there's a couple of things that you can do to make this process a little bit smoother. So one, and I always encourage employers to do this, partner with the right organizations. So I'm going to plug the Access Center for Regulated Employment again here. The Access Center can assist employers with recruiting internationally trained individuals to fill current and anticipated staff positions. Keep that anticipated staff positions in mind. You don't have to be hiring at this exact moment to start to connect with these organizations and start planning. They can help with understanding international equivalencies to make informed hiring decisions. They can facilitate document evaluation for candidates, new recruits, or existing employees. And they can work with employees interested in achieving full licensure in their field. So again, if you have folks who are applying to your company or organization and you need that licensure, you can refer them to other organizations like WES, where they can get that equivalency done, and like the Access Center, where they can start that licensure process. But one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is valuing the actual process of licensure. Ask yourself, can you offer opportunities while someone is in the midst of getting licensed? Now, this is different depending on the field, the regulated field, and the position that you may be hiring for. But there are some professions in some industries where you can bring someone on board and they can work in different ways while they're still in the process of getting licensure. When chatting with the folks at the Access Center, one of the pieces of advice that they give is exactly this: value the process. Know that if a candidate is coming to you and is saying, I am in the process of doing this, that matters. It demonstrates huge commitment to the field, to their profession, you don't want to wait and potentially lose that talent until they're have that full license. So how can you start to bring them on board? What positions can you offer them in the meantime so that you can access that talent over competing companies or organizations? The other thing that's very important to keep in mind is that policies in regulated fields are not the only barriers that immigrants face. We need to recognize bias and consider the value in giving someone a chance. For example, we've heard that the Ontario government is proposing legislative changes around regulated fields to make access to employment a little bit easier. But this doesn't necessarily mean that doors are going to be flying open. We need to take responsibility for the barriers that we create as employers and ask ourselves, what can we do differently to create more opportunities and open more doors? So, what happens after you hire? Onboarding, of course. So oftentimes we see employers put a ton of work into recruitment, into screening, into interview, but then when it comes to onboarding, they run through the basics during orientation, and then they toss people into the deep end. This is not great for anyone, but especially for newcomers who are not only navigating a new work culture, but they're navigating a new culture. So these are some essential things that you can keep in mind when onboarding. Just like any other tips, any of the other tips that were shared through this talk, they're not necessarily tough to do, but they're often missed. So the first one is engaging the wider team. So one of the big things that we need to take into consideration when engaging newcomers is, again, not just that recruitment piece, but that retention piece. So how do we really integrate people and create a sense of belonging? If we're able to engage the wider team as we're onboarding new people, there's a greater chance of feeling that sense of belonging. It's important for people to know when you're hiring, when new folks are coming on board and what they're doing. And it's important for that new person to know who else is a part of this team, who else is a part of this organization, who can I connect to for what, and how can we collaborate with one another. So make sure that you're being really intentional about engaging the wider team. Another way to engage the wider team is through the actual training and orientation process. Oftentimes we leave training and orientation to hire HR or the hiring managers, but there could be lots of other talents and skills across your organization. Maybe they don't work directly with that role or with that team, but maybe they have something to offer in the way that they train or educate or onboard people. So take a look at what skills and talents you have within your organization and try to tap into that in the onboarding process. Secondly, emphasize your diversity, equity, and inclusion practices and policies. Again, this is this idea of taking that statement off the page and bringing it into the orientation process. This is really important because when you're bringing newcomers on, it's your way of saying to them, we want you here, we value you, not just for the skill set you bring, but the lived experience that you have, and this is how you can bring this to your work. It's a very important part of creating that sense of welcoming and belonging. Make sure that you're orienting newcomers to the entire organization. So that means where you are now and where you'll be in the future. You want to get them plugged in. This really helps with retention because it allows them to envision themselves inside the organization and where they may be able to go in the future. It helps to build those pathways of progression. This next one is super important, and I cannot stress enough how impactful it can be. Establish a buddy or a mentor system within your organization. One of the best things that you can do for newcomers coming into your company or your organization is line them up, is connect them with a person who's there to support them with everything outside their basic role responsibilities. Things like workplace culture, knowing how to communicate with people, asking those day-to-day questions like, what do I do for lunch? Where do I eat? How do I communicate with my boss? What are the rules around engaging this person or that person? So things that we often take for granted when we're born and raised in Canada. There are a lot of things that newcomers need to learn, and having a mentor or a buddy system can be really, really beneficial. You also want to consider introducing people to the community, to the culture, and to the language. So when I say community, I'm not talking about the community within the organization. I'm talking about the community outside of the workplace. One of the things that we know is hugely important in workplace retention for immigrants is feeling not only a sense of belonging in the workplace, but a sense of belonging in the community at large. So what can you offer newcomer staff or any new staff? What can you offer them that introduce them to the community? Maybe you can offer them a package that talks about some of the fun festivals or events or restaurants or local shops that are in your community to help them get connected. You want to also make sure that you're introducing them to the culture of the organization. Culture within Canadian workplaces is not a given. As someone who works with a number of different companies and organizations, I can tell you that a startup tech company is very different from a well-established financial institution. So don't assume that people are going to understand what the culture looks and feels like and how to engage in it. Introduce them, give them a little 101 on the culture of your company or organization. And of course, language. Not only are newcomers, many newcomers do speak English, but there are also many, many newcomers who it's a second language for them or it's a new language for them. But not only this, but we have our own languages inside our industries and inside our companies. We have acronyms and abbreviations and slang and industry jargon. And if you're not already plugged in, it can feel like an entirely new language. So a simple thing you can do is offer people a glossary and do your absolute best as you're onboarding people to explain the things that you are saying. Set clear expectations. Again, one of those things that, should be a given, but there's still a lot of assumptions we make. If we say to someone, okay, I want you to get through this health and safety, get that done ASAP. What does that really mean? So we want to make sure that whatever expectations we set out through the onboarding process, that we're very clear about when it needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and any outcomes. So be as clear as you possibly can. And last but not least, you want to make sure that you're asking for feedback and that you're being flexible. This is both during the onboarding process as well as continuing beyond that first 3 months. That is often the probation period. So you want to make sure, one of the reasons it's important to check in during the onboarding process is because you don't want to wait till the very end and find out that the way you were training someone wasn't working for them. Make sure you're doing those check-ins regularly. And again, be flexible. Any good company or organization is going to have a process and a strategy set out for onboarding. And if you don't have that, make sure you set aside the time to do that. It is helpful for absolutely anyone, but especially newcomers. But when we take that process and strategy, we do have to recognize that it may not work for everyone. And this is not about being a newcomer or not. Everybody has different learning styles and different communication styles. So the ability to be flexible and modify the way that you offer that training and onboarding is going to benefit you in the long run, because the more effectively and efficiently that you can onboard someone, the faster they're going to get into that work and the more integrated they're really and comfortable they're going to feel in the workplace. So these are some very essential things to keep in mind when you're onboarding. And like I said, they're not tough to do, but they're easy to forget and they're easy to say, oh, we don't have the time for this. But you can see this quote I have pulled up here, and I love this quote. Like musical chairs, you can't add a new person to the game without stopping the music and adding a chair. So although in the moment you might think, oh, we don't have time to pause, you don't have time not to pause. When we look at the realities of the labor force, this is a quote unquote buyer's market. There are more jobs than there are people, and candidates are able to be very picky and very strategic in where they are working. So you need to be very intentional and strategic, not just about your recruitment, but about that retention piece too. Make sure that's a really great experience and pause so that you can offer absolutely everything that you can to newcomers that are coming on board. So that's all that I have to offer for the talk today. And what I will say, although I threw a ton of stuff at you, I will say this is just the tip of the iceberg. So if there's something that I shared where you're like, ooh, I'd really love to dive in deeper with that, I'd love to learn more about that, just a reminder that through Immploy, we do offer education, training, and coaching for employers. It's customized, it's unique to your needs, and we luckily are fully funded, so there's no cost to you. At the end of the day, our goal is to help prepare you so that you are better prepared to recruit and retain newcomers. So I'll just share that little tidbit in case you want to do a follow-up. But otherwise, we can probably jump into any questions that there may be.
Thank you so much. Am I on now? Excellent. Thank you so much, Sienna. There was definitely a lot of great information there. And I think one of the really important takeaways for any employer or agency that's looking to use some of these practices, it's not a switch. It will take a lot of work. It will take a lot of being very intentional about rolling some of these things in. And I think one of the things that stuck out for me is looking at a lens of internationally trained resumes and looking at not as someone doing something poorly, but versus doing something differently. And I think that's a really great reminder that just because it's different than what we're used to doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong. So I'm taking some questions here from the audience and I'm going to read them to you. I haven't read them yet, so if I stumble, it's not my fault.
It's all good.
So I like the proactive approach in hiring, but do you see this feasible financially to employers as well? Do you think it might be risky re-employers' credibility for candidates if the employers are only developing pipelines and no immediate openings? So this is the one where you're saying being proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm glad that you asked that question around feasibility, because we have had, we've worked with employers where we've, talked about different practices that people can implement in their workplace. And one of the things that comes up often is, oh, well, that's going to take time and that's going to take money. And the reality is yes, it is going to take time and it is going to take money. But if we do value equity, diversity, and inclusion in our workplaces, and if we want to be able to access really great talent, we have to put our money where our mouth is. So that being said, there are lots of ways to engage that are going to be feasible for people in terms of time and finances and capacity. And again, take into consideration the opportunities that are already being created where you don't have to put a lot of work into it, you just have to show up. And so connecting with, organizations like LIPS or Immigrant Employment Councils or WIL Employ, YMCAs, Goodwills that are already hosting events and activities is a great place to start. In terms of the question around credibility, I think the most important thing is to be transparent in that process, and that we may not be hiring now, but we want to stay connected to good talent. And depending on the kind of work that you do, then some people will be following along, right, and looking for that really great opportunity. So, and again, I think, I always encourage employers, if we want different results, we have to try different solutions. And so if it's not something you've engaged in before, why not give it a whirl?
Great, thank you. We have another question here looking at accreditation, validation, and regulation. It's also something to consider in the far north of our country. And is there anything that you can do to support people who are immigrating perhaps from northern communities into the southern parts of Canada and with accreditation? Or is accreditation through WES and through all those programs only done for immigrants?
You know what, that's a really great question. I don't want to give an incorrect response, but my assumption is that you would be able to, because a lot of the services that people offer are also for immigrating to Canada, but also moving between provinces. I do think I'm looking at this question here too. And I think one of the things that I do want to note, because I think it's important that you bring that this is being brought forward, is the different culturally across Canada. I think that's also something important to consider. So if there's a newcomer that's been in Canada for 10 years, but they've spent the last 8 years out in BC, and then now are moving to Ontario, or to your point, from north and moving to south, we also have to recognize the cultural differences that exist in that transition as well. Culture is a huge piece. And so one of the things that I know the St. Thomas Elgin LIP as well as Immploy is involved in is intercultural competency training. And so recognizing that cultural differences they don't just happen country to country, they happen within our country as well. So being able to build your competency around within diverse and cross-cultural workplaces can be hugely beneficial.
The second part of that question is really honing in on the linguistic differences. And from what I understand, most of the English language training that occurs is either federally or provincially funded. And I don't know if they would support interprovincial immigration, as in someone who was born and raised in Canada, getting that
Right.
support for English language. There might be some private pieces that are included in that, but from what I understand, it wouldn't be linked in with some of those English language classes that others would be accessing.
Right. And I think it's a good point about, where language courses and programs may be funded and how they're sort of controlled and managed. And so this is something that employers can also lead, right? Employers can lead workplace language training. And because again, even if even if you have everyone who speaks English, every industry, every workplace has their own sort of set of language. So being able to lead that in your own organization and company can give you a lot of leverage in terms of being able to recruit and engage folks from all over the country and all over the world.
Absolutely. So you did talk about the opportunity for WIL to help attract into people for your positions. Can you give a little bit more background on how that looks? Like if someone posts a job on a job board that they're really used to, what are the additional steps that would have to take for them to for you to also support that recruitment?
That's a great question. So there are no additional steps, which is really, really amazing. We try to make it as easy and as seamless as possible for employers. So what I would always encourage employers to do is add WIL Employment Connections to your list of where you post. So if you're sending this job posting our way, you actually get an added bonus. It actually gets a little bit easier than if you're posting anywhere else, because what we do through our job match recruitment services is we shortlist, screen, and recommend candidates based on the job posting that you share. So not only do we post it on our job boards and send it out to all of the clients that we're working with, we actually have a job match team that reviews the job postings and the skills and qualifications that you're looking for. And we look through our pool of talent and we'll actually recommend candidates. So it actually helps to reduce the work a little bit on employers' ends and really streamline it.
And also, just because we have people from across Southwestern Ontario and beyond, what is the jurisdiction or the geography that you serve?
So we at WIL Employment Connections, we serve Southwestern Ontario. So really anywhere in the province up to, kind of around the GTA area. There are a number of organizations, some that I mentioned, that would be greater resources depending on where you're at. So if you're up near Ottawa, Hire Immigrants Ottawa is a great resource to connect to. If you're in and around the GTA area, the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council is there as well and can help support. But we often have through job match, generally the focus is Southwestern Ontario, but with many of our other programs and services that we offer, people can be almost anywhere in the province.
Great, thank you so much.
Sorry, I'll say too that we are part of a national network. So for people who are outside of Ontario, I would look up the Immigrant Employment Councils of Canada, IECC.network online, and there's tons of great resources all across Canada.
Great. So I think as a first starting point for anyone who's looking to hire or looking to just include some more EDI practices within your workplace, I think it's a good start to reach out to Sienna, and her contact is available through the website, and it was shared through her presentation. So thank you so much, Sienna. It's always great to hear you just talk about all these issues, and I think you have a really great way of making it concise and easy. Oftentimes with cases of looking at immigrant talent, it feels really confusing, but you just make it so digestible. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.